If you have ever wondered why a narcissist can discard one person without a second thought, yet remain disturbingly fixated on another, then you are already standing at the edge of something deeply uncomfortable, but also profoundly clarifying. Narcissists are not obsessed with everyone they encounter. In fact, most people pass through their lives without leaving any lasting imprint at all. But there is a very specific type of person who gets under their skin, a type they cannot truly forget. When we talk about narcissists, we often become distracted by their charm, by the seemingly magnetic way they draw people into their orbit. It is easy to focus on the outward expressions, the glittering charisma, the calculated manipulation, the seductive language that seems to promise everything. But to truly understand narcissistic obsession, we have to look beneath that surface. We must move beyond the superficial allure and examine the internal mechanisms that drive the narcissist's mind. We must study the patterns that govern their behavior, the triggers that ignite their relentless fixation on certain individuals. And when you do that, something astonishing becomes clear. Narcissists do not obsess at random. They do not fixate on just anyone who crosses their path. There is a very particular type of person who captures their attention, a person who provokes something deep, unsettling, and unresolved within them. One of the most potent triggers, one of the single most dangerous things you can do in the presence of a narcissist, is to maintain unwavering boundaries. Boundaries appear simple on the surface, but their impact is anything but small. At their core, boundaries are declarations of self-respect. They clearly and firmly define where you end and where another person begins. A boundary is saying, without apology, that you will not tolerate what is harmful. It is stating that you will not allow yourself to be violated, and that you will preserve your integrity even when someone else is determined to dismantle it. Most people, when confronted with narcissistic manipulation, soften their stance. They blur their lines, bend themselves, or give in, often in the hope of avoiding conflict or preserving some illusion of harmony. But there are rare individuals who refuse to do this. They draw a line and they hold it. No matter the pressure, no matter the charm, no matter the guilt trips, silent treatments, or emotional theatrics, they do not waver. That steadfastness, that unyielding commitment to their own dignity, is precisely what fascinates and terrifies the narcissist at the same time. Narcissists operate according to a fundamentally different internal logic. Their world is built around control, hierarchy, and the manipulation of perception. They measure relationships not in terms of mutuality or respect, but in terms of power and influence. They thrive when they can bend others to their will, when they can dominate emotional space, when they can maintain the illusion that they are the center of someone else's inner universe. The person who enforces boundaries presents a problem they cannot easily solve. A narcissist cannot tolerate autonomy that does not align with their expectations. If you stand firm, if you refuse to be pulled into their orbit, if you insist on having a life that exists outside the gravitational pull of their need for control, you become something profoundly threatening to them. That threat often transforms into obsession. Obsessive focus in the narcissistic mind is not born from affection or admiration. It does not come from love or respect. It is born from disturbance. When a narcissist encounters someone who will not yield, who will not comply, who will not absorb their narrative as truth, they experience an internal crisis. Their identity, which is fragile, hollow, and dependent on external validation, begins to wobble. This destabilization triggers an urgent attempt to resolve the cognitive dissonance they feel. They cannot understand why someone refuses to be absorbed, why someone resists being conquered. And when the human mind faces a problem it cannot solve, it turns toward repetition. It loops. It obsesses. They replay interactions, scrutinize words, analyze expressions, and search relentlessly for a weakness, a vulnerability, a point of entry that can be exploited. In this sense, boundaries function like a mirror to the narcissist's inner fragility. They reflect back a truth the narcissist has spent a lifetime trying to avoid. Beneath the charm, beneath the confidence, beneath the social maneuvering, there exists deep insecurity and an unrelenting hunger for control. When you maintain your boundaries, you force them to confront a reality they are poorly equipped to face. You demonstrate that their power has limits. You show that their influence is not absolute, that their ability to shape others is constrained. And it is in that confrontation that obsession is born, not from loyalty, not from admiration, but from the desperate need to understand, to regain, and to reconcile the fact that someone has stepped outside their control. Consider the ordinary, everyday interactions a narcissist has with others. They may attempt to charm you with excessive flattery, to seduce you with attention, to subtly undermine your confidence, or to guilt you into compliance. They may create confusion, distort facts, or provoke emotional reactions that leave you questioning yourself. These behaviors are not random. They are tests. They are probes. Each attempt to push you, to manipulate you, to encroach on your emotional or psychological space is a way of measuring how strong your boundaries are. Each interaction ends in one of two outcomes: acquiescence or resistance. And the more consistent your resistance becomes, the more impossible it is for them to categorize you within their internal framework. You do not fit their mold. You do not respond predictably. You do not crumble under intimidation, coercion, or charm. You do not collapse into self-doubt when they distort reality. You become an anomaly. And anomalies, by their very nature, command attention. They generate curiosity, anxiety, and in the narcissist, obsessive fixation. It is essential to understand that boundaries are not arbitrary. They are not walls designed to punish, isolate, or reject others. They are structures of self-preservation. They are clear declarations that you recognize your own worth and that you will not trade it for the comfort or ego of another person. When you uphold boundaries consistently, the narcissist cannot help but focus on you. They may attempt to rationalize your behavior, paint you as difficult, or recast you as the villain in their story. They may try to manipulate the perceptions of others, launching subtle or overt smear campaigns. They may provoke drama, stir conflict, or create chaos in the hope of pulling you back into emotional engagement. But all of these behaviors are signs, not of your weakness, but of your strength. Every instance of obsessive attention is evidence that your boundaries are working. Your presence disrupts their internal balance. Your autonomy challenges their sense of superiority. Your independence highlights something they cannot replicate. But this is also where the danger emerges. The more effective your boundaries are, the more intense their fixation may become. Obsession is not passive. It can take the form of relentless communication, intrusive monitoring, or stalking behaviors. It may appear as public character assassination, subtle sabotage, or attempts to infiltrate your social or professional circles. It can escalate into psychological warfare designed to destabilize you emotionally and provoke a reaction. The critical distinction to understand is this: their obsession is a reaction, not a reflection of your intent. Your boundaries do not create the obsession, they reveal it. They expose what already exists beneath the surface. They bring the narcissist's fundamental vulnerability into the open, forcing it into awareness. Maintaining unwavering boundaries requires far more than simple willpower. It demands clarity, self-awareness, and a commitment to values that cannot be negotiated away under pressure. It requires the ability to recognize manipulation when it appears, to separate provocation from genuine engagement, and to act consistently in alignment with your principles rather than your emotions. Each time you enforce a boundary, you reinforce your identity. You remind yourself of your autonomy. You resist the gravitational pull of the narcissist's manipulative energy. And paradoxically, the firmer you stand, the more clearly you illuminate the narcissist's deficiencies. Your stability becomes a contrast they cannot ignore. There is a deeper psychological principle at work here, one that extends beyond narcissism itself. Human beings, when confronted with resistance, often experience heightened focus and narrowed attention. We become driven to solve what feels unsolvable. The narcissist is no exception. When they encounter someone whose self-respect is immovable, whose independence is intact, they are pushed into a loop of analysis and fixation. They cannot accept autonomy that does not align with their narrative. They cannot rest until they have either reasserted control or understood why control is impossible. And in that obsessive focus, something unexpected emerges. You gain a mirror of your own power, not power over them, but power within yourself. Here lies the paradox. By maintaining boundaries, by refusing to yield, by standing firm in your truth, you do more than protect yourself. You reveal the limitations of the narcissist. You show them, whether they consciously acknowledge it or not, that the world is not endlessly malleable, that not everyone can be bent to their will. You demonstrate that some individuals retain dignity, resilience, and clarity, even under pressure. And in that revelation exists both danger and freedom. The danger of intensified obsession, yes, but also the freedom that comes from knowing you are rooted in something real, something stable, something fundamentally untouchable. To summarize this dynamic without oversimplifying it, narcissists obsess over people who maintain unwavering boundaries because boundaries expose what they cannot control. Boundaries threaten the fragile reality they have constructed. They cannot bend the person who stands firm. They cannot break the individual who remains consistent. In their obsessive focus, they are attempting, in their own maladaptive way, to reconcile a vulnerability that has been laid bare. This is why certain people become unforgettable to a narcissist. This is why, no matter how much time passes, no matter how distant the connection becomes, their mind returns again and again to the person who refused to yield, who refused to compromise, and who refused to sacrifice their integrity for the comfort of the narcissist. It is also why cultivating and maintaining boundaries is not merely a defensive measure. It is, in truth, one of the most powerful forms of self-assertion available to a person. Boundaries declare your presence. They state clearly that you are not negotiable, that your inner world is not open for appropriation, and that your identity is not something another person can claim or redefine. The stronger and more consistent your boundaries remain, the more you destabilize a narcissist's efforts to define you, manipulate you, or possess you. Although their fixation may feel unsettling or intimidating, it ultimately stands as evidence of your inner strength. It is a reflection of the very quality that makes you unreachable and unbreakable, even when subjected to sustained psychological pressure. What appears threatening on the surface is, at its core, a response to something the narcissist cannot dismantle. When we think about narcissists, there is a widespread misconception that their attention is drawn primarily to those who admire them, inflate their ego, or willingly participate in the reality they construct. This is partly true, but it represents only one side of the dynamic. The more dangerous and compelling focus for a narcissist is not the person who worships them, but the person who sees through them. This is the individual who notices the fractures beneath the mask, the emptiness behind the charm, and the distance between words and behavior. These people are rare, and for a narcissist, their rarity makes them simultaneously irresistible, enraging, and ultimately a source of fixation. Their presence disrupts the narcissist's internal order. To see a narcissist for what they truly are is not a casual or accidental act. It demands sharp observation, emotional intelligence, and courage. It requires noticing subtle inconsistencies in behavior, manipulative patterns that escape most people's awareness, and contradictions between what is promised and what is actually delivered. It also requires resisting the pull of charisma and remaining anchored in reality when perception is being distorted. When someone manages this, they become an unintentional mirror for the narcissist. This mirror reflects truths the narcissist has spent years suppressing, denying, or reshaping. And that reflection is profoundly threatening. It pierces the illusion that the narcissist depends upon for psychological survival. Narcissists build their identities around control, distortion, and the careful regulation of how they are perceived. They create narratives in which they appear exceptional, wronged, misunderstood, or superior. They shape emotional environments where they are always the hero, the victim, or the misunderstood genius. Every interaction is curated to support this illusion. But when someone detects the gap between appearance and reality, the narcissist encounters something they cannot easily neutralize. They are faced with evidence that their identity is fragile, that their influence has limits, and that their manipulations are not universally effective. This confrontation with reality becomes intolerable. It is precisely this exposure that ignites obsession. Narcissists cannot tolerate being seen clearly. They cannot endure the knowledge that someone is observing them without submitting to the illusion. They cannot rest until the perceived threat is resolved. Control must be restored, either by absorption, manipulation, or discrediting of the observer. As a result, their attention narrows and intensifies. They replay conversations repeatedly. They analyze tone, timing, and reactions. They scrutinize every interaction, searching for leverage. Their mind becomes circular, endlessly returning to the one problem it cannot solve: a person who refuses to be deceived. Seeing through a narcissist's facade is itself a form of power. It is a quiet resistance that does not require confrontation or aggression. Simply by perceiving reality accurately and holding that perception consistently, a person asserts autonomy that a narcissist cannot tolerate. This clarity exposes the limits of their control and the vulnerability of their constructed self. This is why obsession forms. Narcissists are drawn, often against their conscious will, to those who reveal the boundaries of their influence. These individuals force the narcissist to confront insecurities and inadequacies that would otherwise remain buried. The fixation is not admiration, but compulsion. In a typical dynamic with a narcissist, most people respond in predictable ways. They flinch under pressure, they apologize unnecessarily, they adapt, accommodate, and compromise. These responses reinforce the narcissist's sense of dominance and omnipotence. The illusion remains intact. But when someone does not bend, when they refuse to internalize false narratives, and when they acknowledge the truth beneath the performance, the narcissist encounters uncertainty. Uncertainty is a psychological state they cannot endure. It destabilizes them. It disrupts their sense of control. This destabilization triggers hyper-focused attention. The narcissist becomes driven to restore order, to eliminate ambiguity, and to reassert dominance. The observer's clarity becomes a magnet for obsessive thought. What cannot be controlled must be studied. What cannot be bent must be targeted. It is important to emphasize that seeing through a narcissist does not imply moral or emotional superiority. It does not mean the observer is flawless, invulnerable, or immune to pain. Many people who perceive narcissists accurately have their own fears, wounds, and insecurities. What distinguishes them is not perfection, but perspective. They can observe without being consumed. They can recognize manipulation without internalizing it. They can remain aligned with reality even when pressure is applied to distort it. This consistency is incompatible with the narcissist's worldview. The narcissist's fixation is often involuntary. It is not rooted in affection or care. It emerges from cognitive dissonance. The narcissist cannot integrate the existence of someone who sees the truth without collapsing. Their internal logic, built on deception and dominance, encounters a paradox it cannot resolve. When the mind encounters an unresolved paradox, it loops, it revisits, it obsesses. This is why narcissists return psychologically to those who saw through them, even long after contact has ended, even when distance has been established, and even when disengagement is complete. However, this clarity carries risk. Narcissists are not passive when exposed. When confronted with truth, they often respond with aggression, destabilization, or retaliation. They may attempt to undermine credibility, manipulate social narratives, or provoke emotional reactions to regain a sense of control. Their fixation is therefore double-edged. It acknowledges your clarity, but it can also signal escalation. Understanding this is essential. The obsession is not your responsibility. It is not caused by your behavior, but by the narcissist's inability to tolerate exposure. Recognizing this distinction allows you to maintain perspective. You do not need to engage, justify, or submit. Clarity does not require confrontation. It requires awareness, consistency, and self-possession. Holding truth quietly is often the most destabilizing act of all. The narcissist's obsession with those who see through them reveals a broader truth about human psychology. Truth threatens deception by its very existence. Individuals who perceive reality accurately hold subtle power. They disrupt illusions, challenge narratives, and resist manipulation without effort. For the narcissist, this is intolerable. Their identity depends on shaping perception. Someone whose mind resists distortion becomes a psychological fortress. In their futile attempts to breach that fortress, obsession takes root. There is a paradox at the heart of this fixation. The narcissist is drawn to clarity, yet tormented by it. They are compelled to observe, analyze, and anticipate, while simultaneously feeling powerless and destabilized. The observer, without intent, asserts influence simply by remaining grounded. This dynamic highlights the narcissist's dependence on others for self-definition. Without control over perception, their identity fractures. The one who sees clearly becomes both a threat and an anchor point for unresolved inner conflict. The lesson here is unmistakable. Clarity functions as both shield and signal. It protects against manipulation and illuminates behavior. To perceive truth, to remain aware, and to refuse deception is an act of resistance. It preserves autonomy and strengthens psychological resilience. While narcissists may attempt to provoke fear, guilt, or compliance, unwavering perception remains a source of stability. It cannot be seized or corrupted. It exists beyond their reach. This dynamic also underscores the necessity of self-knowledge. To see a narcissist clearly, one must first understand oneself. Personal vulnerabilities, emotional triggers, and internal boundaries must be recognized. Without this foundation, perception becomes reactive and exploitable. Grounded self-knowledge, by contrast, offers clarity and resilience. It allows one to navigate fixation without surrendering autonomy or integrity. It transforms awareness into quiet strength. Ultimately, the narcissist's fixation on those who see through their facade is not love, loyalty, or admiration. It is unresolved cognitive conflict. It emerges because the observer disrupts the illusion upon which the narcissist depends. This fixation is both a challenge and an opportunity. A challenge because it may provoke manipulation or escalation, and an opportunity because clarity and steadfast perception offer protection, autonomy, and a powerful affirmation of selfhood. The individual who sees through a narcissist holds up a mirror the narcissist cannot look away from. That mirror demands confrontation with reality, exposes hidden vulnerabilities, and ignites obsessive attention. Yet the true power does not reside in the narcissist, nor in the obsession itself, but in the observer's capacity to remain clear, to preserve boundaries, and to act in alignment with truth. In this way, seeing through a narcissist becomes not only protective, but empowering and deeply transformative. When we closely examine narcissistic behavior, a consistent pattern begins to emerge. Narcissists are intensely attuned to power, authority, and perception, not in a healthy or constructive sense, but in a way that constantly scans their environment for weakness, compliance, and susceptibility. They are highly sensitive to psychological imbalance, able to detect insecurity, hesitation, and self-doubt with remarkable precision. They feed on these vulnerabilities. They exploit them, reinforce them, and ensure that those around them remain dependent, whether through subtle psychological pressure or overt control. But when they encounter someone grounded in self-respect, someone rooted in their own worth, someone unwilling to trade dignity for approval, something unexpected occurs. The narcissist experiences insecurity, anxiety, and eventually fixation. Self-respect is often misunderstood. It is not arrogance, nor is it pride expressed through dominance or superiority. At its core, self-respect is the quiet recognition of one's inherent value and the insistence that this value be honored. Individuals with strong self-respect possess an internal compass, a moral and emotional framework that shapes decisions, defines boundaries, and guides interaction with the world. They understand that their worth does not depend on validation, approval, or manipulation. It is not contingent on another person's perception. They act from this foundation with consistency, clarity, and integrity. And for a narcissist, encountering such a person is profoundly destabilizing. The tools they rely on to influence, control, and distort perception simply stop working. Narcissistic insecurity is subtle but deeply potent. Beneath the confidence, bravado, and charm lies a fragile ego that requires constant reinforcement. Narcissists construct elaborate narratives, manufacture illusions, and manipulate perception to maintain a sense of superiority. Their identity depends on it. But when they face someone who refuses to bend, who recognizes manipulation, who insists on autonomy, they experience an existential threat. Their self-concept, which depends heavily on the pliability of others, is challenged and destabilized. In some sense, it is humiliated. This is why narcissists become obsessed with individuals who embody strong self-respect. The obsession is not admiration, it is not genuine esteem, it is a frantic attempt to understand, contain, and neutralize a source of insecurity they cannot eliminate. When someone refuses to internalize the narcissist's narrative, when manipulation fails to provoke predictable reactions, the narcissist is forced to confront personal limitations. This confrontation is deeply uncomfortable and intolerable. It fuels relentless mental focus. The narcissist analyzes, scrutinizes, and tests repeatedly, searching for cracks, weaknesses, or a way to regain dominance. In ordinary interactions, this dynamic becomes visible. The narcissist may use subtle belittlement, sarcasm, or criticism to provoke doubt. They may attempt charm, seduction, obligation, or emotional leverage. The individual with self-respect recognizes these tactics and responds with calm, consistent boundaries. They remain composed, they do not absorb false guilt, they do not submit to coercion. This grounded response is precisely what triggers obsession. The narcissist cannot reconcile the presence of autonomy with their need for control. They cannot process the existence of someone whose sense of self does not depend on them. A person who does not fear judgment, crave approval, or bend to narrative manipulation creates an unresolved paradox in the narcissist's mind. This cognitive dissonance loops endlessly. The narcissist becomes trapped in intrusive thought, fixated attention, and compulsive analysis. The very existence of someone they cannot dominate becomes an ongoing psychological irritation they cannot resolve. Strong self-respect does not require confrontation or aggression. It does not involve proving worth or engaging in conflict. It is about steadiness, clarity, and self-possession. It is the maintenance of a consistent standard for how one allows oneself to be treated, and the refusal to violate that standard for acceptance or validation. Those with self-respect communicate power through action rather than argument. They enforce boundaries without dramatics. They remain aligned with their principles. They do not escalate or overreact. This balance of restraint and integrity is both threatening and magnetic to a narcissist, prompting intensified fixation. Narcissists are drawn to self-respect because it exposes their own deficiencies. When confronted with dignity and inner stability, their carefully curated facade feels insufficient. The illusion of superiority collapses in the presence of someone who does not seek validation. This exposure intensifies insecurity and drives obsessive behavior. The fixation is active, not passive. It shows up as repeated analysis, provocation, and strategic manipulation. Narcissists may attempt to create social or professional disruptions, undermine confidence indirectly, or recruit others to reinforce their narrative. Despite these efforts, controlling someone with strong self-respect proves difficult. And here lies the paradox. The more the narcissist struggles, the more fixated they become, and the more clearly the power of self-respect is revealed. Their failure highlights the observer's strength. For those navigating interactions with narcissists, understanding this pattern is essential. Recognizing that obsession is rooted in insecurity rather than attachment allows perspective to remain intact. The intrusive attention and manipulative behaviors are projections of fragility, not reflections of inadequacy. Self-possession, clarity, and consistent boundaries become essential tools. They allow one to navigate fixation without absorbing it. Strong self-respect functions as a protective structure. It limits the narcissist's capacity to destabilize or control. The obsession may persist, but it cannot force compliance or erode integrity. In this sense, the power remains with the observer. Self-respect acts as both shield and compass, guiding decisions and preserving autonomy. A broader psychological principle is at work. When human beings experience threats to control or status, they often fixate on the source. Narcissists, due to their dependence on external validation and fragile identity, experience this reaction with heightened intensity. The presence of someone who does not conform, who does not yield, who resists manipulation, triggers an involuntary cycle of attention and preoccupation. The narcissist becomes trapped, attempting to reconcile dominance with limitation. Self-respect does not require antagonism. One need not provoke or retaliate. Composure, consistency, and alignment with personal values communicate authority without aggression. These qualities attract fixation while simultaneously preventing manipulation. The individual with strong self-respect becomes a paradox in the narcissist's world, a challenge, a threat, and an object of obsession. Without asserting dominance, they expose the limits of control and highlight vulnerability. Understanding narcissistic fixation through self-respect reframes the experience. The attention, however uncomfortable, reflects strength rather than weakness. It confirms that boundaries are effective and autonomy intact. In this way, narcissistic obsession becomes a mirror, reflecting not deficiency, but inner power. Finally, the central lesson comes into focus. Cultivating strong self-respect is not simply a defensive maneuver. It is a proactive assertion of autonomy and dignity. It demands self-awareness, clarity, and the courage to uphold personal principles in the face of manipulation, pressure, or intimidation. It requires understanding the nature of narcissistic insecurity and recognizing the patterns of obsession that emerge from it. Most critically, it rests on the conviction that one's worth is inherent, non-negotiable, and immune to external distortion. When this foundation is firmly established, the individual is not merely surviving narcissistic attention, they are thriving within it. They move through fixation with clarity, enforce boundaries with confidence, and preserve integrity with unwavering consistency. The narcissist's obsession, however intense, becomes something external, a manifestation of the narcissist's internal instability rather than a force that defines the observer's reality. Human beings are deeply wired for stories, roles, and patterns from the earliest stages of social development. In families, schools, workplaces, friendships, and intimate relationships, individuals are subtly or overtly assigned roles that fit neatly into the expectations, desires, and perceptions of others. These roles are often unspoken, yet profoundly influential. The obedient child, the supportive partner, the reliable colleague, the entertaining friend. Most people accept these roles consciously or unconsciously because predictability offers comfort, belonging, and a sense of security. Fulfilling expectations allows social systems to function smoothly. But there exists a rare category of individuals who resist being cast into someone else's narrative. They do not automatically accept assigned identities, and it is precisely these individuals who leave a lasting impression, particularly on narcissists. Narcissists depend heavily on assigned roles as tools of control. They require others to behave according to a predetermined script that reinforces the narcissist's identity and dominance. These roles are rarely negotiated, they are imposed. A partner must be accommodating, a friend must provide affirmation, a colleague must not challenge authority. When others internalize these roles, the narcissist's world becomes orderly and predictable. Control feels secure. Superiority appears unquestioned. The narcissist remains central within the emotional and psychological lives of those around them. But when they encounter someone who refuses to play the role, someone who resists categorization and cannot be neatly contained, disruption begins. The refusal to accept an assigned role is not merely defiance, it is an act of autonomy. It is the assertion of self against external demands, a declaration that identity is not open to negotiation or coercion. Those who resist do so not to rebel, but because they recognize their intrinsic worth and refuse to trade it for another person's comfort, ego, or narrative. This resistance, though often quiet and understated, is extraordinarily powerful. It destabilizes the narcissist's carefully constructed world. A world built on compliance and predictability is suddenly confronted with unpredictability. The individual who refuses to be scripted cannot be easily controlled, manipulated, or dismissed. They exist on their own terms, and that existence challenges the narcissist's sense of omnipotence. When a narcissist encounters someone who refuses to play the assigned role, obsession frequently follows. This fixation is not rooted in admiration or affection. It is born from threat. It arises from the recognition that control is incomplete and dominance is limited. The narcissist becomes preoccupied with reclaiming, understanding, or neutralizing the individual, because their very presence exposes vulnerability and the boundaries of power. The refusal to conform functions as a mirror, reflecting the narcissist's dependence on external validation, their fragility, and the emptiness beneath the facade. In many cases, those who resist assigned roles do so without confrontation. They do not need to challenge openly to be unforgettable. Their consistency, calmness, and refusal to acquiesce create resistance that cannot be ignored. Even small deviations from the expected script can provoke prolonged attention. Asserting a boundary, expressing an independent thought, prioritizing personal needs over imposed expectations. These seemingly minor acts are enough to disrupt the narcissist's internal order. The narcissist's mind, faced with this anomaly, becomes fixated. They replay interactions, scrutinize behavior, and search for leverage. They look for a weakness to exploit, a strategy to restore compliance, a way to reassert control. This dynamic is especially pronounced in intimate relationships, where narcissists often assign roles that reinforce dependence and entitlement. A partner is expected to be accommodating, forgiving, and responsive to emotional manipulation. When that partner insists on equality, autonomy, or self-respect, the narcissist's worldview fractures. Cognitive dissonance arises as expectations collide with reality. The unpredictability of the partner cannot be reconciled with the narcissist's need for control, fueling obsession that may persist long after the relationship ends. The refusal to accept assigned roles also reveals a broader psychological truth. Authenticity is inherently disruptive to manipulation. The more grounded an individual is in self-knowledge, principle, and clarity of identity, the less susceptible they become to coercion. Narcissists, whose methods depend on predictability and perception management, are fundamentally challenged by authenticity. An individual who acts according to personal values rather than external scripts becomes destabilizing. They cannot be fully assimilated, dominated, or erased. In response, narcissists often become preoccupied, consumed with strategies to understand, control, or discredit the individual who resists. It is important to recognize that refusing assigned roles is not about seeking conflict. It is not confrontation for its own sake. It is about internal consistency, autonomy, and alignment with one's principles. Those who live this way do not merely defy the narcissist, they embody integrity. Their behavior signals that they are not malleable and that domination will meet resistance. For the narcissist, who depends on malleability, this is intolerable. Attention narrows, thoughts loop, obsession forms. Another critical aspect of this dynamic lies in memory and perception. Individuals who refuse assigned roles become unforgettable because they resist erasure. They cannot be folded into a narrative of compliance. They cannot be categorized as predictable or submissive. Their existence challenges assumptions and exposes limitations. Even after distance is created, the narcissist continues to engage mentally, replaying interactions and attempting to reconcile the disruption. In this way, refusal to conform creates psychological permanence. This phenomenon extends beyond personal relationships into professional and social environments. In workplaces, the employee who maintains ethical integrity or resists unreasonable authority often attracts disproportionate attention from narcissistic leaders. In social settings, the individual who refuses gossip, manipulation, or coercion becomes a focal point for scrutiny and influence. The pattern remains consistent. Refusing to occupy an assigned role exposes unpredictability, undermines control, and triggers fixation. At its core, this obsession is rooted in the narcissist's dependence on external validation. Their identity rests on a fragile structure of admiration and compliance. When someone refuses the script, that structure is threatened. Control appears incomplete. Authority feels unstable. Faced with an anomaly they cannot assimilate, the narcissist becomes preoccupied, returning again and again to the source of disruption. For those who resist assigned roles, understanding this dynamic is essential. Recognizing that fixation reflects narcissistic instability rather than personal deficiency empowers individuals to maintain boundaries and preserve autonomy. Awareness allows strategic response rather than emotional entanglement. It enables integrity without self-blame. The power of refusing assigned roles lies not in opposition, but in self-possession. It is the creation of a personal narrative, a consistent standard, and a clear identity that does not depend on compliance or approval. It is the understanding that one's value is not conditional, that presence does not require permission, and that integrity cannot be bargained away. Those who embody this approach exert influence not through force, charm, or subtle manipulation, but through authenticity, clarity, and unwavering steadiness. The narcissist's fixation becomes an unintended acknowledgement of this quiet power. In the final reckoning, individuals who refuse to accept assigned roles are unforgettable precisely because they are disruptive by nature. Their presence unsettles established narratives, exposes hidden vulnerabilities, and destabilizes systems of control. They resist easy categorization, defy manipulation, and assert autonomy in ways that cannot be overlooked. The narcissist, unable to reconcile the existence of such individuals with an internal need for dominance, becomes preoccupied, fixated, and obsessive. And yet this attention, however intense or uncomfortable it may feel, ultimately highlights the deep strength inherent in refusing to yield to externally imposed roles. By maintaining autonomy, standing firm in identity, and consistently declining to be scripted by others, individuals not only protect themselves but also illuminate the limitations of narcissistic control. They reveal that power is not derived from manipulation alone, but from clarity, integrity, and self-possession. They become living embodiments of resilience, authenticity, and inner strength. And in doing so, they become unforgettable not because they pursued attention, but because their very existence resists erasure. When considering human obsession, it is common to associate it with love, admiration, or deep emotional attachment. Attention is often romanticized, leading to the assumption that when someone cannot stop thinking about another, it must be rooted in connection, care, or emotional investment. Yet, when narcissists are involved, this assumption is deeply misleading. Narcissists do not obsess over others out of genuine affection, concern, or emotional intimacy. Their fixation is not grounded in love or loyalty. It is grounded in threat. Obsession within the narcissistic framework reflects disturbance, insecurity, and an internal imbalance triggered by the presence of someone who challenges, disrupts, or destabilizes their fragile sense of self. At the core of this dynamic lies the narcissist's need for control. Narcissists are individuals whose sense of identity, worth, and psychological stability is regulated externally. They depend heavily on the reactions, compliance, and validation of others to sustain a coherent self-image. When people comply, yield, or reinforce the narcissist's narrative, their world feels orderly, predictable, and secure. But when someone resists, sets boundaries, refuses to internalize distortions, or asserts autonomy, the narcissist experiences a profound psychological threat. This threat is not merely emotional. It strikes at the foundation of their identity and destabilizes the delicate balance on which they rely. Because narcissists cannot tolerate threat without disruption, their attention becomes compulsive. Obsession emerges as a behavioral expression of this internal tension. They cannot simply disregard the source of disruption, because that source exposes the limits of their control, reveals vulnerability, and undermines the carefully constructed illusion of superiority. Unlike admiration, which can be comfortably absorbed, threat cannot be integrated. It demands attention, analysis, and intervention. The narcissist becomes hyper-focused not out of desire or care, but because the threat is intolerable and must be accounted for. Understanding the difference between affection and threat-driven obsession is essential, as it reframes the experience for those targeted by narcissists. When a narcissist fixates, it is easy to misinterpret the behavior as interest, attachment, or even hidden admiration. Individuals may ask themselves why the narcissist cannot let go, or why they remain so invested. The answer is not emotional attachment. It is a reaction to a perceived challenge to ego, authority, or control. Narcissistic obsession functions as a mechanism of self-preservation, a compulsive attempt to reassert dominance, restore predictability, and neutralize internal discomfort. Examining the psychological mechanics involved reveals several processes occurring simultaneously. First, heightened vigilance emerges. The narcissist scrutinizes every action, word, and reaction of the person perceived as a threat. Any deviation from expectation is examined for weakness or leverage. Second, compulsive rumination sets in. Interactions are replayed repeatedly, strategies are mentally rehearsed, and potential outcomes are anticipated. Third, manipulation-oriented behavior follows. Attempts are made to reassert influence, distort perception, or undermine confidence. In each instance, the obsession is strategic, instrumental, and self-serving, designed to restore equilibrium rather than to foster connection. It is equally important to acknowledge the psychological vulnerability underlying narcissism. The narcissist's identity is hollow, dependent, and fragile. Unlike individuals with healthy self-concepts, narcissists cannot internally regulate self-esteem or reconcile discrepancies between expectation and reality. When confronted with someone who asserts independence, exposes inconsistency, or challenges control, the narcissist cannot integrate this reality without discomfort. Obsessive attention becomes an unconscious effort to resolve cognitive dissonance. They are caught in a repetitive loop of analysis, strategy, attempted control, failure to reconcile, and renewed fixation. Obsession becomes the behavioral echo of internal instability. From the outside, threat-driven obsession can easily be mistaken for love or passion. The narcissist may communicate persistently, intrude on boundaries, or maintain intense focus in ways that appear caring or invested. Yet these behaviors are functional rather than emotional. They serve the purpose of restoring predictability, asserting influence, and mitigating perceived loss of control. The individual who maintains clarity, boundaries, and autonomy is not being loved. They are being monitored, evaluated, and assessed. The narcissist's attention reflects insecurity provoked by independence, not admiration for character or strength. This distinction carries significant implications for relationships. Many remain entangled in narcissistic dynamics because they misread obsession as affection or attachment. Persistent attention is interpreted as interest, remorse, or eventual recognition of worth. In reality, obsession signals disturbance rather than devotion. It indicates that the narcissist perceives a threat they cannot neutralize, that their illusions have been challenged, and that control remains incomplete. Recognizing this shifts perspective. The individual is not the object of love, but the mirror of vulnerability. The appropriate response becomes self-preservation rather than reciprocation. Threat-driven obsession also explains the intensity and longevity of narcissistic focus. Unlike typical interpersonal attention, which fades with distance or disengagement, narcissistic fixation can persist for years after separation. Physical absence does not resolve the perceived threat. The narcissist's internal representation of the individual remains unresolved, causing continued mental looping, strategizing, and fixation. The obsession persists because the threat is internal and structural, not situational or emotional. Understanding this mechanism enables a strategic response. Awareness of the narcissist's motives allows individuals to preserve autonomy without unnecessary emotional entanglement. Recognizing obsession as insecurity rather than affection supports boundary maintenance, clarity, and principled behavior. Self-possession becomes the means of neutralizing the threat, not through appeasement or engagement, but through consistency and restraint. The distinction between affection and threat also has ethical implications. Healthy relationships are built on mutual recognition, empathy, and voluntary engagement. Attention driven by fear, insecurity, or threat is not relational. It is coercive. It does not foster intimacy, growth, or mutual respect. Narcissistic obsession should therefore be understood not as connection, but as projection. It is a symptom of fragility, dependence, and the presence of autonomy in another. In practical terms, persistent attention from a narcissist is best interpreted as evidence of one's integrity and boundaries rather than as validation. The individual who becomes fixated upon represents something the narcissist cannot control, influence, or assimilate. Independence itself becomes the trigger. The more firmly one maintains clarity, self-respect, and boundaries, the more intense the narcissist's attention may become, yet the less effective their influence truly is. This framework also clarifies the tactics narcissists employ. Threat-driven obsession is frequently accompanied by manipulation, projection, and distortion. Emotional provocation, misinformation, and attempts to undermine confidence are common strategies. Each tactic is a response to perceived danger rather than an expression of care. Recognizing this allows the individual to contextualize behavior, detach emotionally from provocation, and respond in alignment with reason and values, rather than impulse. Awareness transforms confusion into clarity and disruption into empowerment. Ultimately, understanding that obsession reflects threat rather than affection is liberating. It shifts interpretation away from self-blame or internalization and places responsibility where it belongs. The narcissist's fixation becomes a signal of disrupted control rather than personal significance. This realization restores agency, reinforces boundaries, and affirms that autonomy, integrity, and self-possession are not only protective qualities, but profoundly destabilizing to those who rely on dominance for identity. The focus shifts away from the self as an object of love, desire, or special attachment. It centers instead on the narcissist's insecurity and inner instability. This realization fundamentally alters perception, informs decision-making, and reinforces the necessity of firm boundaries. It enables an individual to disengage emotionally while remaining situationally aware, to protect integrity without yielding to coercion, and to understand that obsessive attention is a reflection of weakness rather than a declaration of worth. In its simplest form, the core insight is this: narcissistic obsession is never a measure of affection. It is always a measure of threat. Behaviors that may resemble longing, devotion, or attachment are in fact expressions of anxiety, compulsion, and a fragile sense of self. Recognizing this truth allows individuals to navigate relationships, attention, and influence with clarity, self-possession, and wisdom, transforming what might otherwise feel oppressive into confirmation of personal boundaries, autonomy, and strength. When confronting the complex reality of narcissistic behavior, empowerment does not begin with confrontation, retaliation, or the hope of reforming the narcissist. The first and most essential step is understanding the dynamics at play, understanding the psychological mechanisms that drive obsession, manipulation, and control, and understanding how these behaviors intersect with vulnerability and personal boundaries. Knowledge in this context becomes the foundation upon which autonomy, control, and freedom are reconstructed. Without understanding, reactions tend to be impulsive, inconsistent, and exposed to manipulation. With understanding, responses become deliberate, consistent, and grounded in clarity. To understand narcissistic dynamics is to recognize a central principle. Narcissists fixate not because of affection, attachment, or admiration, but because of perceived threat. They are compelled to focus on those who resist manipulation, uphold boundaries, assert independence, or decline to accept assigned roles. The obsession itself is a behavioral expression of internal instability, a fragile self-concept, and reliance on external validation. Narcissists cannot tolerate the presence of someone who disrupts their sense of control. As a result, their attention becomes compulsively directed toward resolving the perceived disturbance. This understanding fundamentally shifts perspective. Attention from a narcissist is not evidence of importance or love. It is an indication of their need to neutralize threat, restore equilibrium, and regain predictability. This realization is the first step toward reclaiming control because it reframes the power dynamic. Individuals subjected to narcissistic obsession often feel overwhelmed, confused, and trapped by the intensity of attention. They may question their own behavior, replay interactions endlessly, or attempt to appease the narcissist in hopes of reducing fixation. Yet, when the underlying mechanism is understood, threat rather than affection, perception changes. The attention no longer signifies obligation or inadequacy. It becomes an external symptom of the narcissist's instability. Power is recognized as residing in the autonomous mind, in boundaries, and in clarity of perception. Reclaiming control begins with the cultivation of awareness. Awareness serves as the lens through which patterns are identified, strategies are assessed, and responses are calibrated. The first layer of awareness involves observing behavior without internalizing it. When obsessive attention arises, it must be recognized for what it is: compulsive, reactive, and self-serving. Each intrusion, manipulation attempt, or provocation reflects internal disarray within the narcissist, not a measure of personal value or responsibility. Observing behavior objectively allows emotional detachment from manipulative influence, creating space for strategic rather than reactive response. The second layer of understanding involves identifying the triggers that provoke narcissistic fixation. These triggers frequently include unwavering boundaries, refusal to accept imposed roles, self-respect, perceptual clarity, and the assertion of autonomy. When individuals recognize these triggers in their own conduct, they gain predictive insight. They can anticipate patterns, identify manipulative tactics early, and regulate their own responses. This knowledge transforms uncertainty into preparation, and preparation forms the cornerstone of control. Reclaiming control also requires the development of internal structure. Narcissists depend on external validation and compliance. They thrive on insecurity and malleability in others. When an individual strengthens internal structure by clarifying values, enforcing boundaries, and cultivating self-respect, manipulation loses effectiveness. No matter how persistent the narcissist's attention becomes, its capacity to coerce or destabilize diminishes. Internal structure functions as a psychological stronghold, allowing one to navigate attention without absorbing it, to respond with intention rather than impulse, and to maintain dignity under pressure. Another essential component of reclaiming control is the consistent enforcement of boundaries. Boundaries are not arbitrary. They are expressions of autonomy and self-respect that define what is acceptable and what is not. When boundaries are enforced consistently, they communicate psychological authority over one's time, energy, and emotional space. This does not require aggression or escalation. It requires steadiness, clarity, and commitment to principle. Each enforced boundary signals to the narcissist that influence is limited and compliance cannot be compelled. Understanding also reshapes expectations. One of the most destabilizing aspects of narcissistic dynamics is unpredictability. Emotional volatility, manipulation, and obsessive attention can generate confusion and self-doubt. Recognizing that the obsession is threat-driven rather than affectionate recalibrates expectations. It becomes clear that appeasement will not dissolve fixation, that validation will not resolve obsession, and that engagement is not required to manage compulsive attention. This shift replaces anxiety with strategic clarity, allowing action to be guided by principle rather than fear. Control is further reclaimed through selective engagement. Understanding enables deliberate choice regarding when, how, or whether engagement is necessary. Not every provocation warrants a response. By evaluating interactions through the lens of boundaries, integrity, and strategic priorities, individuals determine appropriate levels of engagement. Selective engagement preserves energy, protects autonomy, and prevents narcissistic attention from dictating behavior. In this sense, understanding becomes synonymous with freedom. A significant aspect of reclaiming control lies in reframing perception. Understanding transforms the narrative from one of helplessness to one of empowerment. When obsession is understood as a response to threat, it is no longer internalized as judgment or inadequacy. Instead, it reflects personal strength, the capacity to maintain boundaries, and resistance to manipulation. The narcissist's fixation becomes evidence of limitation rather than dominance. Agency is restored by interpreting obsession as an external phenomenon rooted in insecurity rather than a personal flaw to be corrected. Understanding also informs long-term strategies for resilience. Sustainable control requires more than momentary reaction. It involves planning, reflection, and cultivation of emotional and psychological resources. This includes reinforcing supportive relationships, seeking objective perspectives, clarifying values, and engaging in practices that promote stability. Each measure strengthens autonomy and reduces susceptibility to manipulation, creating a durable foundation for navigating obsessive attention without compromise. It is crucial to recognize that reclaiming control is not about overpowering the narcissist or reversing the obsession. The focus remains internal, centered on clarity, integrity, and autonomy. Understanding that obsession stems from threat rather than affection allows individuals to operate from internal authority rather than reactive engagement. They become stewards of their own psychological space, designing boundaries and responses that preserve dignity and independence. Control is reclaimed not through domination, but through knowledge, self-possession, and strategic clarity. Ultimately, understanding offers a path to liberation. Narcissistic dynamics can feel suffocating and disorienting when navigated without insight. Obsession and manipulation can erode confidence and stability. Yet when the underlying mechanisms are recognized, when fixation is understood as threat, boundaries are upheld, internal structure is strengthened, and perception is reframed, freedom returns. Authority over one's own mind, decisions, and emotional resources is restored. The individual reclaims the territory narcissists attempt to occupy and asserts sovereignty over their psychological domain. Reclaiming control begins and ends with understanding. Understanding illuminates patterns, identifies triggers, clarifies boundaries, and informs strategy. It transforms fear into clarity, confusion into insight, and vulnerability into resilience, allowing narcissistic attention to be navigated with wisdom, autonomy, and unwavering self-possession.